Hey, hello. Welcome to The Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'm Scott Abel, the host of the show today, and I'd like to welcome our guest, Sakura Ticer. Sakura, can you hear me? Are you on the line? I can see
Yes,
you.
hi. Hi.
Awesome. You're coming in loud and clear. Thank you for joining us today. Let me tell the audience a few things about our show before we dive right into talking with you. First, audience members, if you're new to the Bright Talk platform, you should know that we don't have access to your camera or microphone, so we can't see or hear you. You can ask a question of us at any time by clicking the Ask a Question button located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Opening that little window by when you click on that link, we'll open a text window into which you can type some kind of comment or question for us. Just know that we cannot use that functionality to text or comment back to you, but we will queue up as many of the questions that you send in as possible, and I'll ask them with the time that we have remaining on the show. Also, about this webinar, there's additional content located in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel. Clicking the attachments button will open a document repository where you can find links to additional content, including troubleshooting information for the webinar platform we're using today, and contact information for our presenter and for the content wrangler and myself, as well as promotional information from the sponsor of today's show, Zoom In Software. During the show, you might be asked a poll, but probably not today because I think we're going to be just asking Sakura questions. And at the end of the show, I'll remind you that we love feedback and ask you to rate the quality of the information that was delivered to you today on a 1 through 5 star scale, with 5 being the highest rating. There's a little field into which you can type information that we'll share with the presenter. So if you've got feedback, please do give it. I know that she would really appreciate it. All right, without further ado, welcome to the show, Sakura Ticer. Sakura, I can see now. Let's see. Let's switch back from our view, and there we are. You're live and in person. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Where are you broadcasting from today?
Okay, well, I'm in San Francisco,
Excellent.
California. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here. It's bright and early.
Excellent. Well, I'm hoping to join you. San Francisco was my former home. I relocated during the pandemic to Palm Springs, but I'll be back next month for a conference in person. I can't believe it, actually.
Oh, wow.
Are you excited for in-person events too?
Yeah, I am. Definitely. I'm actually craving it. Looking forward to going back to an office soon.
Great. Well, without further ado, let's jump into the show today. So for the audience members who might not know who you are, what you do, tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to today's topic.
Well, I've been working in product content strategy for quite a long time. The way I got into it was I started studying sciences as a graduate, undergrad and graduate student. And then in between, I got interested in pursuing Japanese language, and I moved to Japan. I lived there for a year, studied Japanese, and then I was recruited to work in publishing. And that's where I learned how to copy edit, copyright, work with a publishing team, illustrators, and so on. And I did that for 3 more years. So after that, coming back from Japan, I decided I wanted to make a career in technical writing. So I landed in Marvell Technology, and that's where they actually happened to need someone who also did some Japanese translation. So I did that my first year to translate one of their key technologies. And then I went from being a technical writer to a manager, and then senior manager and director in over a 20-year period. After that, I decided to go into software strictly, and landed in a SaaS startup, and did that for the last few years, leading product content strategy.
Excellent. So before we dive deeper, could you tell our audience, what do you think of as product content, and what is product content strategy?
Okay, well, product content to me is the information about the product. That's in software, it might be the UI text, the setup guides to understand how to use the product. It could be the release notes. In hardware, it's products, the product spec. It's also the user manual and application notes. And the strategy around it is making the customer successful through that content. And that would include thinking about how the content is delivered, or how the content is consumed, either in-app or through a website, a help center. It's also thinking about the media that you create. It could be video or text, and thinking about the end user, who they are and what they would need.
Lovely. And increasingly, over the years, especially the last decade or so, technical communication has been identified as a type of content that also can drive prospect interest, helping bring prospects along and convert them into customers in much the way that marketing is believed to do so. Do you see that product content has value sometimes in certain situations for people who have yet to become your customers?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I do it myself when I, evaluate products. I look at the help articles to help help me make my decisions about the product. So I think definitely, if you're savvy or you're really digging deep into the product, that's one area you would definitely look into. Um,
How do you think that product documentation plays a role in the overarching product strategy? Where does it fit, and how do you make the case for that if people don't get that?
well, the product docs to me are the essential thing that you need to understand the product. And that was my firsthand experience at Marvell, for example. When you have a chip, it's basically a black box. You don't really know what it does. It doesn't talk to you. So the only way to really understand the product is through the product docs. And for me, I look at product docs as the product in a lot of ways.
You mentioned the semiconductor space, I think, just touching on that for a minute, which is really competitive and a fast changing market. So building, I guess, a solid content team has to come with a lot of challenges. Can you share your strategies for building a product content production team? How do you find the right people and retain them? Do you have ideas you could share?
Yes, it was super challenging in a very technical environment because, especially in a sort of a niche area, it's hard to find people who have the exact experience. And I find it very interesting that a lot of technical writing teams look for certain specific experiences. It's definitely hard to meet all those requirements, the product knowledge, writing, project management, and so on and so forth. When I recruit and build a team, first I try to look for raw skill sets that I can train. In the beginning, I would have one-on-one trainings. People would be assigned to a buddy, and so on and so forth. And I realized that there were certain gaps at the end that would show up in their knowledge, and so I developed a boot camp that was basically a 12-week course, 2 hours a week, to make sure that people systematically, uh, were able to perform the job and be successful at the job. So, um, and I find that people who have the skill sets for doing the job, they bring something to the table. So the boot camp also became a forum to exchange ideas as well. And for me, really fostering and supporting your people is the best way to have success on your team. I mean, it is the people who make your product successful.
The leaders of both the MathWorks um, documentation team and content team, and also iFixit, a popular website that helps people repair things. Both of them have said in their hiring strategy that they sometimes don't even hire people who claim to be good at whatever it is they're looking for. Instead, it's really about, are they capable of learning new things? Do they have a different vantage point? I think at iFixit, they were talking about how they would recruit people who had absolutely no technical writing skill at all. They opted for thinking they could teach them the technical writing skills, and that maybe because they have philosophy or psychology or neuroscience as a background, that they would be thinking about content and the humans that consume it in different ways than a technical writer would, who might be overly concerned with grammar and typography and things of that nature. So do you feel like kind of a liberal arts or kind of a broad approach of bringing people into the team makes the team more diverse, and that it's worth it to kind of train them in the areas where they might be deficient because they just hadn't had the experience? Is that what your boot camp attempts to do?
Well, yeah, for sure. I look for people with a diverse set of experiences, and they don't necessarily have to be technical. They need to be able to solve problems and think about how to solve problems in a creative way. But definitely, the boot camp sort of ensures that they have enough information to be successful in the job and give them confidence to do the job. So um, some of the most talented technical writers, of course, come from a liberal arts background. But I also had a mix of skill sets on the team. Technical people. It's I think it's curiosity. If they're curious about the technology, then that's a good raw skill set to look for.
That's interesting. I wonder if previous life experiences play a role in like how people turn out in the technical communication space. I say that because I joked once in a conference that everything I learned that I needed to know about delivering personalized experiences, I learned from being a nightclub DJ uh, in the disco era and after. And that's because if you play the wrong song for the audience that you're catering to, people will walk off the dance floor. So you totally know when your content is failing or it's not delivering the joy and whatever else dancers expect. Uh, do you feel like content plays a similar role when you're trying to maintain relationships with existing customers and attract new ones in the product information space?
Well, for sure, I know that customers will complain if they don't see what they're expecting. If there's errors in the content, they will definitely complain, and I'll hear about it. And um, I mean, I guess that's the good thing about your content is that there are channels to get feedback, and there's ways to iterate and improve on it. So.
Okay. One of our viewers has a question and wanted to know, do you notice any differences? Because I think this person is assuming that because you said technical communication, that you kind of understand what we're talking about from let's say, the Society for Technical Communication vantage point. We're talking about creating documentation to help people repair, consume, use, return, maintain products and use them successfully. But product information management is its own category. So there's like content management, technical documentation management, right? And then now you have product information management. So this viewer wants to know, do you get hit with different kinds of pitches from product information system vendors than you do from, let's say, technical documentation content tool vendors? Like, for example, I was going to say, I hear the acronym PIM all the time, right? Product Information Management, but it's not spoken about mostly by people from technical communication. It's usually from a niche subset of people who believe they're creating product information, things like data sheets and things of that nature, catalog content, which is, of course, product content, but it's not all the content that people need in order to be successful. Do you see a crossover, or do you think they're treating those audiences as different when, in fact, you're serving the needs of all those people, regardless of those platforms and what they are called?
Yeah, well, that's kind of raises an interesting point. I mean, even the field, our own field, the name seems to be different. Where depending on where you go. In some places,
Yeah.
it's content strategy, it's information experience, it's um, what else? It's I don't know. It could be part of customer experience. It just seems to be all over the place. Technical writing, technical
Customer
communication.
satisfaction.
Yes. Um, so yeah, I don't get pitched too many, by different vendors so much, but I understand the confusion, that there's, because our titles and departments are all over the place.
Well, one of the things that confused me was I did a little research to figure out who to invite to the show and how to kind of target new people that might want to come on and listen to your discussion with me. And one of the things I found was the product information people are just starting to talk about things like reusing content, but those systems are not componentized systems. So I don't know how they're reinventing, content reuse, but I don't know that it's the same way that technical communicators who kind of were raised on Silicon Valley chip making, for example, was such a tremendously challenging way to produce information. at multiple sources at scale, that they had to come up with a componentized method of doing it so that they could do it and meet their deadlines. But the product information toolkits seem to still be focused on product information, and they're maybe not as mature yet. I don't know if you see that or not in your experience.
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah, in the semiconductor space where the content is massive, you have large quantities of content really to manage. Reuse may not be such a big, uh, you know, point that reuse may not be practical. Let's put it that way. Yeah, because the chips are very massive, and there's a lot of detail to document. So what you're looking for is robust systems and robust platforms that can handle that massive amount of data. I think if your doc sets are smaller, you're writing articles, help articles. For instance, reuse is definitely something that you can lean on a little bit more. But yeah, the way you select tools it's going to be a little bit different in the hardware space.
Have you had any advice on how to go about selecting tools? One of our previous viewers wrote in and asked for advice from a previous presenter who said yes. And one of the things I made a mistake was I thought because the writers use the tool, the writers should select the tools. But in her experience, that did not lead to the outcome she expected.
Right.
So
Right.
what do you have as tool advice? Do you have any pros or cons or lessons learned?
Right. Well, at least, when I'm talking about handling massive quantities of data, you have to have specialized tools. I think it's important to look at who's upstream from your tool, looking at the workflow and, who potentially could, provide content for that, for your content, for your documentation, and also who's downstream, who's going to be on the receiving end of that information, whether it's marketing or maybe a localization team and so on. So definitely looking at the whole workflow. Sometimes, the workflow doesn't work easily. Let's say the systems don't integrate maybe with other systems. So, might need to bring in IT to help you, develop tools or a way to push content into other tools. I actually had a software engineering team that reported into me that did that work. They had the knowledge about what we did, and they were able to test and stress test and, make, the tools integrate with each other. Also, you'd probably have to talk to IT just to see, about storage, whether you're storing content on the cloud or, if there's security systems and things like that. So definitely you want to bring in as many people as you can to help you make a decision on the tools.
Have you ever worked in an environment where IT had familiarity with a particular kind of tool or an approach, and so that's where their default was? And you're like, wait a minute, I'll give you a great example. No one rewrites code every time they use it. They repurpose it. So some IT people, when I'm involved with a contract with a customer, will say, wait a minute, we already have repurposing. Just tell your content people to type all of our stuff into the tool that we use to manage our code, because it's the same thing. The computer doesn't care whether it's code or documentation. But you and I know that a tool designed for developers is not the same thing as a tool designed for technical writers to produce content. And while you may be able to repurpose it, there may be lots of reasons why that wouldn't be the better solution. So how do you address the fact that your IT team might be comfortable with a particular software or approach, but you need to convince them otherwise so that you can get what you actually need?
Well, that's a good question. How would I do that? Um, Well, I think I bring them into, what I'm trying to do, from the beginning, because
Yeah.
I think in collaborating with them, they'll have solutions as well. And they'll think of their own solution. So I think just bringing them into the process of, this is the tool that I need, this is what I needed to do. And, I think they'll figure out, how to solve their problems about, whether they're reusing code or what they can leverage.
All right. That seems like a question that's specific to each kind of company too, and how the company works. For example, I was with a company that fancied itself able to create software because they created software for their clients. So when we decided we needed a new content authoring system, they decided they could just build it, which meant that they built a $4 million frame maker that they could have bought for $800 at Best Buy at the time on a DVD and just stuck it in their machine and installed it. But instead, it took a year and a half of IT resources. It was a humongous project, and it was canceled as soon as it was launched because it was horrible, because
Yeah.
they're not good at doing that. So I think we also run the risk of allowing IT to drive might not be the best thing. So do we just make them partners and try to figure out how to leverage the things we need and give them, what they want without
Oh, I
giving them
see.
everything?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Okay, so yeah, I mean, typically, my team or I've been driving the requirements for the tool that we select. And I definitely go for reusing, like something that's off the shelf. That's something that we don't have to build a whole team around. That completely makes sense. It's more efficient for the company. But the other thing is, when I select a tool, is to make sure that it's scalable. It's not only scalable, but that I'm not tied into that one tool. That I can migrate my content or my framework to another tool. So I look for the foundation, maybe being XML. Maybe that's the part of the decision that I make in tool selection. I just don't want to be tied into using a proprietary tool or database that then I can't port easily to another framework.
Yeah, the escape route, or I think as Colin Powell used to say, something like you have to have a plan to get out of there.
Mhm.
Should you need an escape route. And I think that's really important. We sometimes get tied up in proprietary things that are
Mhm.
difficult to get out of.
Mhm.
Speaking of difficulties, I've heard a lot of challenges recently from managers attempting to grow their teams of technical documentation professionals. Why do you think it is perceived? It may not be in your case, but why is it that people are perceiving a difficulty recruiting technical writers to work on product content development teams? Why do you think that is? Is there really a difficulty, or is it just the way that we think about it?
Um, so that's a really good question. I've always found that it was challenging for me to find the right skill sets. I think the part of it, especially if you're in a very technical field, people may feel that they can't do the work. They may not have that confidence. So, which goes back to why I did the boot camp. But it is a rare skill set. I mean, you talked about liberal arts, having some kind of liberal arts background. You want to also have an interest or curiosity about technology. You want to, kind of be a psychologist. I think you mentioned that, about knowing your audience and working with people. It is a diverse skill set, also being a project manager and driving your projects. So it's true. I think there are people who think that technical writing is just writing or is just editing, and you could just get somebody who can use a tool like Word or FrameMaker, and
Right.
that should be good enough, but that's typically not. I've also worked with recruiters who had a difficult time helping me identify good technical writers.
I'm
uh,
so glad you mentioned that. I started over talking for just a second, but that point will get brought up by the audience members here in a second, which is the recruiter factor. So I ran into an interviewer. I interviewed somebody a few weeks ago where they told me that the recruiting department did not have a category for the role they were creating. Let's just make up the role content designer, right? And they didn't have that in their inventory. They didn't know what the job description was. So they asked the hiring manager, what is this thing, content designer, right? Who are these people? What do they do? So she gave them what she thought were the requirements for that job. But there's no category in the HR database that matched that role. So they asked, well, what do you think the salary range is? So what they did was they took the salary range and went into the HR database and found comparable salary jobs, and then they matched the requirements. And in some aspects of the job, for people that made the similar amount of money, the company required a master's degree. So the HR people just added the requirement that you must have a master's degree, thinking that if they get paid that much, they must need a master's degree. What happened was the list of candidates was so small, the manager was like, where are all the other candidates? And they said, oh, they didn't make it past the screening process. Well, after a long time of that happening, they went back and they looked at the screening process and they were like, why are you asking for a master's degree for this role?
Mm.
And they said, well, we didn't know. So we just assumed that since we pay people over here with this amount of money and they need a master's degree, your tech writers must need a master's degree too. So have you ever had to work with HR to help them really understand what it is that you need, and how do you communicate with them other than just making a list of, hey, I need them to speak Japanese and use a certain tool and know something about semiconductors?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so that is complicated. I mean, it takes a while for, I think, a recruiter to really understand the diverse skill sets that I'm looking for. And it's not specific. It's not like one language. It could be multiple languages. It could be or not multiple. It could be any other language, and it doesn't have to be. It's just I'm looking for people who've stretched their brain in different ways, and trying to think of an example of what that is. But yeah, as far as recruiters are concerned, it's yeah, I definitely don't. So I don't put a requirement for a certain degree. It could be a wide variety of
Yeah.
degrees that can fulfill that job. And then working with them after some time, they get used to the idea and understand what I'm looking for. But it's true that it goes back to what we're talking about. Our fields, the names of our departments, the titles of our roles, they're kind of all over the place, right? It's not well defined like software engineering, for example.
That's actually a really good point. I wonder if your boot camp could be valuable for the recruiters, maybe even a truncated version of it, of like, this is what we're asking people to do. This is what I teach them, that they're going to need to know. And so you're looking for people that are capable of learning to do this, and they already come with a little bit of these other skills. Maybe
Right.
that's a way to massage the HR people and get them to
I
deliver
think
what
that's
you need.
that's a really good idea. I think I'll do that next time.
How about this? This is another question. How do you train and onboard people? How do you work through the issues of hiring? You talked a little bit about your boot camp, but I think the audience members are really interested in this.
Um, well, there's a lot of one-on-one training that happens as well, but yeah, the boot camp is basically sort of a 12-week course and 2 hours a week, and I bring in sometimes experts from different departments to share what they're doing, also to kind of educate how our company works, educate the writer, and I also bring experts from my own team, whether it's editing or tools or whatnot, and make sure that all the bases are covered for including the subject matter. Um, and so it's partly presentation and it's partly discussion. And I'm always evolving the training material. So if they bring up points, things that they didn't understand, or things that maybe they had also suggestions for how to improve it, I would incorporate that as well.
One of our viewers would like to know, is your boot camp an internal company resource, or is it something that you're trying to produce for all product information developers outside of your company can access it as well?
No, it's basically internal, and it's for onboarding, and then there's people on the team who would have refreshers, and because I'm constantly involving the training and improving it, um, I have invited people that interface with us to the training, but not HR yet. So that's something next to try.
Sometimes when we have guests on the show and they have the word content strategy in their description or their title, we ask them, what about content strategy? For example, I get all kinds of pitches all the time from companies that I think do not have any idea whatsoever what content strategy is, because they will come to me and say, today we're going to talk about content strategy. And then they talk about content marketing the whole time, right? And so it's like, oh, you're not talking about any strategic things at all. You're talking about writing, or you're talking
Mhm.
about something else. Have you had any lessons that you've gleaned about how to communicate the need and the value of a formal content strategy so that people don't misunderstand when you're talking to them and think you're just talking about writing?
Right. Right. So I think, anyways, the content strategy needs to be aligned to the business strategy. So, and it needs to have a business value. So when I think about that, it's about not only just producing writing that that would be useful to the customer, but it's how it's delivered. It's also whether they can find it. Can they find the information? Can they use the information? Um, so I mean, all those are impact how the user or customer excuse me, perceives the company. Um, and it's a challenge to kind of continue to improve on that. But at the same time, if you don't have a content strategy, it kind of shows in how the customer perceives the company. If you're not coordinated in the company and you have silos and they're delivering information in different ways and they're saying different things, then the customer would perceive the company to be disjointed, or they may not trust the company at all, or even buy the
How about,
product.
how about leaders or people in management roles that you've had to explain, hey, this is what we need a content strategy for? Have you seen anybody have any aha moments where they go, oh, that's what you're talking about?
uh no, I mean, I don't think I have had that situation. I've at least in my experience, it's that's a really good question. I think the way that I've operated is to constantly evolve the team and sort of improve and add value every time. So in a way, I'm opportunistic. If I see an opportunity to show the value of technical writing or the technical content, I grab it. If it's, for instance, there was a case where I learned that customers were having trouble coming up to speed on the product, and through collaboration and working with other folks, we brainstormed that we could provide our content. It's a very structured content to the customer so that they can ingest it into their own software systems and then ramp up quickly on the product and configure our chip more easily and quicker. So I think what helped me is just talking to my colleagues and people across the company to find ways that I could bring more value to our product through the content. I've not had that. I can't think of a time where somebody had an aha moment. It just sort of kept evolving and evolving to bring the most value.
That's interesting. How do you execute on a product content strategy that's aligned with your overarching business strategy? Can you speak to this at all? What are some of the things that you had to do to make sure that the alignment is there?
Yeah. So I think the way to do that is to understand what the priorities of the company are. If it's, for example, having a best in class product, then you want to have your document to match. For me, like one of the strategies that I had was to have a frictionless self-service help um, for our customers, and so that was the strategy in order for to help the business scale. And the way that the concrete way that I implemented that was to look at the top 10 articles, for example, of where customers were having difficulties and address those, so that we can improve customers' ability to be productive with our product.
On our earlier calls, to kind of flush out what we were going to talk about today, you and I talked a little bit about tenacity. How important is it for a product content team to have tenacity, or kind of a dogged perseverance, or some kind of persistence to do something, even though it might be difficult, or not as quick as you'd like it?
Right. So tenacity is super important, especially in our field, I think, because we're trying to evolve all the time. and just meeting, the deadlines of the content, and making sure it has a certain level of quality. I think there's a lot of hurdles in doing that, because you got to go out and talk to people, you got to project manage, you got to drive. So for that reason, tenacity and persistence is really important. I think in addition to that, I think but at the same time, I think people can get burnt out, and pushing so hard. And so I try to be aware of that, and make sure that people understand the value of their work, and that they get recognized and rewarded, and that they see the value of their work, and how it's paying off for the company.
I think that's super important. And of course, it's part of your job, right? As a leader, it's not just to make sure that people deliver on time, but it's also to kind of shepherd their careers. And speaking of that, we have a viewer who wanted to know, do you have any advice for people who are in the technical communication space who might be trying to look for a way to climb the organizational ladder, let's say to become a director of a content team?
Well, okay. So I would say that it's really important to have a point of view of, a philosophy of your documentation, and how it's helpful to the customer. Like, for instance, I was talking about product as docs. There is a book that was written by the Splunk team, which I think I have in the attachments listed there, that talks about products as docs. So you need to formulate a philosophy or a point of view. Also, I think you have to be really you have to have a strong belief that your product is helping the business. And another way to look at it is that the impact of your documentation, it really affects different parts of your business. So I guess the main thing is to have a strong point of view, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, I would agree. I would say you have to be able to communicate your strong point of view as well in a way
Yeah.
that resonates with the people who you're trying to speak with, which is kind of why I'm interested in this Alan Alda book, right? If I understood you, would I have this look on my face? He wrote a book about communicating after he realized that he had some challenges doing so. And he had always thought, because he was an actor, right, that he had got that down pat. But sometimes people would look at him like, hey, you're not even making any sense. And he would feel the same way about others. You mentioned a book, so I thought I would share it because I just happen to have that book on my desk. The product is the Docs, and it says the product is Docs, Writing Technical Documentation in a Product Development Group by Christopher Gales and the Splunk documentation team. So you can Google that if you guys are interested in the book. Super interesting, and it's full of valuable tidbits. So definitely check it out. It's an easy read as well. Here's a question from a viewer. What role do you think release notes should play within the range of content provided to product content users? What should be their weight compared to other types of assisted content?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's really important to tell the customer what's new in this product. I think it's as important to the user to understand what's in a release note. So yeah, I mean, I think that customers always want to know what's new. And then I think the other thing is to tie those release notes to the features or the functions, where there's more elaborate information about how to use it. So I would say it's about equal weight. Some companies may not think that, because I don't think every company puts out release notes.
Yeah.
I think that what's important is also how to organize it so it doesn't give the impression to the user that that's the only thing that's available for the product. I've heard of people thinking that that's how you understand the product is through the release notes, and that's not necessarily true.
No. In fact, we had a show recently where someone discussed whether or not there should be release notes, and what they decided was no, there doesn't need to be. What there needs to be is information about the release provided to the consumer. It doesn't have to take the form of a release note. Do you maybe think we can accomplish that without putting it in a release note package? There's probably other ways to get the information to people in context.
Right. I mean, yeah, you can definitely organize, for instance, a help center or knowledge base, by topic, and people can learn how to use the product that way. I could see the pros and cons of that. Release notes can be kind of confusing.
This was the argument. I thought it was kind of an interesting way that they got there. So they were doing a content analysis. They'd done an inventory of what their company produced. And then they brought a consultant in. I just happened to be sitting in on the call. I was not the consultant. I was just there to help them with some other related issues. And someone asked, why do we create release notes? No one could answer that question. So finally, after I watched, as a kind of a onlooker, this conversation for a while, I interrupted and said, here's a different question. How many of you worked here when they first decided to make release notes? No one. So no one really knows why they started to make release notes at this company. It could have been because they worked at a different company and they made release notes there. So they thought, oh, well, I'm in the new company. We need to make release notes. But there was no reason for it. And the content strategy people were really frustrated because they said, we need to know the audience and we need to know the intent of the communication, but we also need to know, why are we doing this and how do we know we were successful? And if you just say we make release notes and they need to be done by the day that the software is ready, then you're just driven by a deadline. You're not driven by performance. You're not delivering value necessarily to the consumer. You're just hitting your deadline. Do you think we should start to think about it that way? Do we need a document type that's been created for 25 years just because we created it? Or could we, as you say, maybe even present it as a knowledge center or a blog or something where people can click on a category and see kind of the trimmed down version of all the release notes pieces that impact them without having to read through a release note document? I guess my frustration is they don't know anything about the user when they release the release note. They know something about the product. So they don't know whether I actually need any of that information, but they make me read it in order to determine whether it's valuable for me.
I see. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a good question. I mean, now that you say that, I'm going to be rethinking about the need for release notes. But yeah, I think trying to figure out what the user needs and talking to them and maybe surveying them and really measuring if they're getting what they need is a good way to find out if you can reduce your doc types.
Yeah, and I think my clients landed on this idea that they went out to figure out what kinds of information would be in a release note, how would we categorize it, and then they called it what's new. And then if you were interested, if you were searching the knowledge base for installation related information, any facts that would have came from a release note document that were about installation were tagged as related to installation. And so you knew that there were 3 new things that were affecting the installation process that you might need to know about if you're an installer of that particular software back in the day when they did that kind of thing. Do you feel like that's also what we need? Like, who needs this individual piece of information that's hidden inside the release note? And how do we tease that out and make it available to them so they don't have to read through all the other stuff, right? We do this already by building a knowledge center. We, instead of saying, here's everything about this product in one PDF, you find it yourself. We've broken it into pieces and we're showing them different views of that content, like looking into the document and pulling out only what they need. Do you feel like we could maybe do that with release notes? I can't seem to think of a reason why we couldn't.
Yeah, it sounds like we could do it, but it sounds also like it would be an extraordinary effort to, depending on, your resources. I think I've typically been resource constrained. So that, I guess I look to see what is the essential information that the customer needs, make sure that we address that. But for sure, I think it can be done.
One of our viewers wants to thank you for the thoughtful advice that you provided and wanted to know, how can we prepare to pivot when our company is making a major change like acquisition or adding new product lines? What can we do to shine and to kind of be ready for that?
That's a good question. I think that to pivot, you need to understand the priorities of the company and the priorities of the senior manager when you have a new product. I've actually had the case where I've had new product and dealt with, acquisitions and so on at the same time. And so it can be a lot of priorities that you have, but I guess what the best thing is to iterate on that, just focus on the top priority, and try to deliver to what your customer needs. I think also involving your team is really important, so that they're part of the solution. And uh, if you really want to do something transformational, like driving something new, a new concept, a new paradigm, um, involving your team can be really transformational to them. And also, it makes them stronger, and they can at the end have a bigger impact on the company.
One of our viewers said that best practices is one of their favorite things, but their boss said, what about worst practices? In other words, what lessons, if any, that you could share have you learned that you think, oh, yeah, we're not doing that again? So, yes, we've learned how to better do things, maybe content reuse and content strategy. But is there anything that you've learned as a manager and a leader that you would say didn't really work the way that you thought it would? And maybe there's a better way to do it.
Mm.
I realize we're catching you off guard. You don't have to have an answer to every question.
No, no, no. I can't think of something that I wouldn't do again, but I think there are things that I would do better. For instance, or yeah, or maybe not even necessarily to, yeah. So maybe one thing that I would not do maybe again is I did have for a time have a newsletter that was to sort of tie in the various groups in our organization, and talk about what they were also doing and what we were doing. And that was an extraordinary amount of effort, and I realized that that may not have been the best use of my time. So I think at that moment I could have prioritized better. I did that for about a year, and then sort of got burnt out. Yeah.
That's okay. I was just, I made an assumption once that because we could digitize information, that all information should be digitized. So I walked into a client environment where they had like let's say a big binder full of information, have post-it notes sticking out of it, and like bookmarks, all kinds of stuff. Other pages that were not even part of the original document have been shoved in there, and it was basically a Frankenstein version, right, of their documentation, and it was in the support center. And so I started talking about how we should, modularize and digitize all this information so that would be more fluid and more adaptable, and we can present it in different ways. And one of the support people waited for me to tell them all the many reasons why we should do that, and then they raised their hand, and one of them said, "Do you know how many times a year we use that book?"
Oh.
I was like, "No," and they said, "Oh, we're in accounting. We're related to taxes, so we only use the book on December 31st. So should we digitize all that information for one day's worth of project?" And I said, "I don't know. Is that day the most important day?" "Yes, it is, but we want to make sure that people know this stuff before that day. So how do we do that without investing in a huge project that only results in a great set of information for one day? How do we replicate that so that it's a great set of information every day?" You're solving one of our problems that isn't really a problem. So my lesson was, I really need to understand the problems before I start trying to solve them.
Oh, that's definitely a good point. I'm trying to think if there's anything like that in my experience. No, I mean, I just think that it's definitely challenging. I think the main thing is I just keep trying to evolve. So, to keep addressing, whatever new challenges that we have.
Lovely. Let's take a few questions from the audience. So the first question I have is, this viewer says they love your idea of refresher sessions with your team, and they ask, what are some examples of refresher sessions, that you have had for your technical writers in the past?
Okay. So one is, for instance, our tool sets might change, or how we interface with the tools, or how we use them. That's one way. We may have new doc sets, new doc types, different doc types that come into play. And also our processes, they're always evolving. We're not we don't keep things the same. So those things, as the company evolves, our processes evolves, and maybe we become more rigorous in certain ways. For instance, project management might become a more rigorous thing in your company. So you talk about, how you interface with the project management or the project management system itself.
Excellent. Two more questions for you. Let's try for some quick answers here. So, what role does taxonomy play in your product information management environment?
That so Taxonomy, basically, I worked with marketing on that particular project, which is to, figure out how to define our product, what to call it, how our naming structure is, so that they could use the same. And it was proliferated throughout the company, how the content was managed, was using the same, naming conventions. Um, that was one particular case where I, changed, like, worked with marketing, and throughout the company we reduced our doc types. That forced us to reduce our doc types from something like 50 to 20. um, I think it's an iterative process. I think you can, build on that for the.
That's significant, going from 50 to 20. Did you learn some other lessons? Like, when I work with marketing, I find it interesting sometimes that they will make proclamations about how different they are. And then I'm like, you know what? My mom doesn't give a shit whether you wrote it or I wrote it or your budget paid for it or my budget paid for it. She just wants the right answer to the product question that she has at the moment that she needs it, where and when she needs it, in the language and the format that she prefers. She doesn't care about anything else. You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. And
Mhm.
then the marketing people were having ahas. One of them came to me and said, "Do you think we could do the help topic of the day?" Well, sure. Why couldn't you? Right. And she was like, "I can marketify this. I can make this marketing." I'm like, "Well, it already is marketing, because if you're looking for the answer to that question and you get it from the vendor that actually provided you the product, you might be engendering some loyalty. Your customer may think, wow, I asked the question and they gave me the answer I need. These guys are good." Right. Instead of, oh, I'm so frustrated. Now I have to call support. I'm going to be disconnected and put on hold. Then they're going to make me call back. And, it's a lot of dancing around. Do you feel like um, customer experience, that move toward kind of everybody caring about customer experience, allows marketing and tech com and product information people to work closely together under the auspices of improving the customer experience? So it's less about how different we are and more about how can we come together to make this better for the customer in the end. Is marketing playing a role there at your company, in the companies that you've worked with?
Yeah,
In
definitely.
that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a we've been collaborating on, how we deliver the content, what the messaging should be. And at least in the software company I worked at, we're pretty well coordinated in that, from the inception of the product and thinking about how we're going to communicate that out, and what kind of announcements we would do in app, and I would, provide that content in app, and tie it back to the help center. So we wanted a seamless experience for the customer. So we definitely work together on that.
Is micro content, or like content that's on the screen, UX content, in your mind also part of technical documentation, or is that a different department's responsibility?
I I've seen it as part of, the content strategy, product content strategy. In fact, it was under my purview or my domain, uh, my responsibilities. Definitely, it's a very specialized area. I think it's more art, or as much art as it is science, and maybe even more art than science. But um, it can be different, but I think it really, product content strategy almost starts there. You have the words about, that describe the product, and then from there you're creating the documentation that describe how to use the product. And marketing is taking some of those words and repurposing it into their content, and everything sort of just expands from that. So that's a pretty important part of product content strategy, I think.
Excellent. And our final question today will be, do you have any recommendations on how I could communicate to executives the value of our product documentation?
So I think that in terms of the value of the product documentation, goes back to what I was saying is product is the docs. Um, I guess if you can imagine the scenario of, if you didn't have it, how would the business go? I know that in some companies it's not considered valuable and it may be considered a cost center and so on. But I think also what you want to do is try to position your content strategy so that it is adding to the revenue. And I guess one good way to show that is, if you don't have it, could you still have the same revenue? So it's pretty important. And we were talking earlier about how it's used to, sell the product. If you could show data points about, how many people are looking at the documentation, and maybe even survey the user before, when they buy or purchase your product, what made them decide to use the product or buy the product. If documentation comes up as one of those things, then you can make a case.
All right. Well, it looks like we're out of time. That's going to have to be the last question for today's show. I want to thank you for joining us and doing such a great job of kind of helping us understand product information management and the strategies behind it. Product information is definitely the product. I think on this show, you have no problem convincing people that. So thank you for joining us today and sharing the information that you've learned over your career. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Excellent. And let me close out the show here by just saying a little bit of thank you to our sponsor today, Zoom In Software. If you don't know about Zoom In, let me tell you really quickly. Zoom In Software is the producer of a powerful content delivery platform. That's software that allows you to bring together content of all types, whether it's structured, unstructured, audio, video, or other types of content in one modern online knowledge center, which would improve your customer experience that you provide to both prospective customers and existing customers alike. If you'd like to learn more about how companies are leveraging Zoom In Software, point your browser to zoominsoftware.com or click the attachments button located underneath your webinar viewing panel, where you can learn a little bit more and peruse some of the information provided by the marketing team at Zoom In Software. Definitely check them out. Also, our upcoming show I wanted to tell you about. I'm super excited that in 2 weeks' time, you should be receiving an invitation in the email that invites you to our next episode, May the 10th. We're going to chat with Kim Jeske. She's the Director of Technical Content at Cloudflare. We're going to have a chat about the changing role of product content and why she believes the content is the product, much like Sakura does. And she's going to tell you why it's time we started treating it that way. So thanks for joining us for today's show. I really appreciate it. Until we see you again, stay safe, be well, and keep doing great work. Thanks for joining us.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoom In. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.
Thanks, Sakura. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.